we oftentimes get in our own heads and we think, oh, if I know this, then everyone else knows how to do this too. That's not true. That's not true. And one of the interesting things I found about moving careers, switching from journalism to engineering, is that I took for granted how important, or I guess how valuable communication skills are.
Hello, Christina Warren. Really good to interview you today.
It's great to be here with you.
Thank you for joining me. To extend, this is a podcast for junior engineers, and this is actually the first time that I host in English. Usually it's in Hebrew, because we started it in Tel Aviv in Israel. So it's very nice to be able to reach out to more people.
It's great for me to be here, and I'm very honored to be your first English interview.
Thank you. So I'm very excited to hear about your experience in the tech world, and maybe we can start with your background and what you do today and how did you get to do that?
Sure. So my name is Christina Warren, and my current job, I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I've been at Microsoft for about 2.5 years, and I work in developer relations, and I do a lot of talks, at different groups on different topics, different technical topics. And what I really do is, even the title of developer advocate can mean different things to different people, but how I think about it is I'm not advocating on behalf of Microsoft. What I'm doing is I'm advocating on behalf of the developers in the community, and I'm going back to the product teams and sometimes the marketing teams and other groups and wanting to make sure that the products that we're making can be as good as they are, and that if there are pain points people are hitting, that other people are aware of that. But at the same time, also learning from those product groups and those other groups, and sometimes even contributing, figuring out, hey, what's coming up? What's being done? Why is something done a certain way? So when I talk to developers who are actually working, I can explain to them, maybe give them additional information about why something is a certain way, or knowledge about how to do something that they might not otherwise be familiar with. So in my specific job, I focus a lot on our video and kind of our content strategy. So I host a lot of videos on our YouTube channel, Microsoft Developer, and I also, will do things like right now we're at Microsoft Ignite, and I'll do, live interviews on stage with developers or executives talking about the things that are coming out, and also, things that are exciting and new, or maybe how to do something, showing off what some of the latest and greatest things are, or even changes that might be existing in different products or developer tools. So, but I focus a lot on our video content, about thinking about what types of things we can create for our audiences who are online, because I know that for me, that's one of the ways that I learn, is that I go to YouTube and I type in something and I want to find out more about it. And so that's I think an opportunity that we have to help bring people to our services and our products, but also just teach them about tech or help them with tech in general. Or if they just want to, listen to very smart people talk about technical topics, they can do that too. And so I've been at Microsoft, like I said, for 2.5 years. And before I joined Microsoft, I actually don't have a traditional tech background, and which actually is not unique to a lot of the people that I work with. A lot of us kind of came into tech through different ways. Some people, studied computer science in college and then went straight into a tech career. Some people were just kind of learning things on their own and then kind of found their way into consulting or a tech career. With me, it's a little bit mixed. So I discovered the web and building websites when I was 12 or 13, and I learned C not long after that. And so I started coding when I was in middle school. And then into high school.
That's pretty impressive.
Oh, thank you. Well, what it was, this was like 1997, and so I guess Java was a big deal then, but if you were going to, and this is how different things are, if you wanted to learn to program, if there weren't a ton of resources online, so you'd go to the bookstore and you would see, okay, I'm going to see books that I can have. And there was a book that was like Teach Yourself C in 28 days or something like that. And it even had a thing in it that like it came with a floppy disk where there was an exam and you could send the exam in and have it graded, and they would give you like a couple of college credits at some mail order college. I don't know. All I know is I did that, and I went through that process, and I learned kind of the fundamentals that way. But I really always loved the web, and I always loved building web pages. But when it came time to me to go to college, there were some experiences that happened when I took computer programming classes in high school where I knew that I liked tech, and I knew that I liked building things, and I liked programming, but I didn't know if I wanted that to be my career. I was the only girl in my class, and this was like in 1999, 2000, and most of the guys were nice to me, but some of them weren't. And they were discriminatory in ways that just, I thought to myself, I was like, I like other things and I have other skills. I don't want to work with people like this. If this is going to be my life, I don't want to have to sit next to someone like this. And so that really made me kind of go, well, I don't want to study this in college. And so I studied film and video production in college. And I actually also studied like pop culture and things that you really can't get a real job with. Well, you would think, but I still kept up with tech, and I repaired computers when I was in college, and I still kept up to date with some of the latest things happening with programming, but I didn't work as an engineer. You know, it was all kind of side projects and things like that. And what I found was that there were a lot of people, men and women in the tech world, especially like in web development communities, who weren't like the people that I went to high school with, and were more accepting and were fun, and like me had interests that were broader than just technology. You know, they like to talk about movies and music and culture and things like that. And so when I look back at my life now, I think, oh, it would have been interesting if I had studied computer science and had that, you know, traditional educational and academic background. But I don't have that. What I do know how to do, though, and what I've always loved to do, is I love to write. And so I graduated from college when, in the United States, the financial crisis happened. And it was a really bad time to be trying to kind of get a job almost anywhere. And I thought I was going to go to law school, and that was going to be, I was going to have to take out a lot of student loans. And I didn't know if there would be a job for me once I graduated. And so instead, I started writing. I started a freelance writing career. And that led me into a 10-year career as a journalist. And so for me, I always go to things, do what you know first. And okay, I know how to write. I know about tech, so I'll write about technology. And so I had an interest, and so I was a business and technology reporter. I covered the entertainment industry as well, but primarily I was business and technology. And in the course of that career, I really didn't have a chance to do a lot of development and engineering and programming, but I kept up with things, and I still had a lot of friends who were in that space. And I still really liked that stuff. And in that world I will say, even if this sounds conceited, of like the mainstream tech journalists, I was one of the most technical. Even though many of the things that I would write would be for a non-technical audience, and I would have to break those things down and make it understandable to them, I understood the high-level concepts much better than most of my peers. And so I would oftentimes be able to interview people and talk with development teams and product managers, and have really good conversations with them and a good understanding of what was happening in those spaces. But to be honest, I didn't ever see myself as working at a tech company. I always thought, well, that's not what I do. I like these things, and I do some of these things on the side and side projects, but this isn't me. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a developer. And then about 2.5 years ago, Microsoft approached me for a job. And that kind of opened my eyes to saying, oh, and it wasn't a job in communications. It was like a PM job or an engineering job. And I was like, that would be interesting. And I was really nervous about going in for the interview. I was really nervous about, can I do this? Do I have enough qualifications for this? And my mom was the one who, she looked at the job description, and she was like, no, you have all these skills. You can do all these things. But it really took me being in the job interview at Microsoft. And that interview process is intense. You go in, for me, it was 7 hours. It was, like, I met with 6 people. It included lunch. There wasn't really a break, and you're talking with people and you're explaining ideas. I didn't have to do a coding test, but I did have to whiteboard how I would break down a complex topic. And it was in that process, I was breaking down the process of explaining, something complicated and making it more manageable, that I realized, it was about halfway through the interview, maybe a little more than that I realized, oh, I've got this. I can do this. Even if I don't get this job, even if they come back and they say, we liked you, but we're going to go in another direction, I'm good enough to be here, and I have this. And so I joined Microsoft in May, the end of May of 2017, and it's been really interesting going from covering the technology world as a journalist to now like being in it and working alongside some of the product groups, partnering with them in some ways, working with PMs, also working with community, and really having to learn a lot. And the interesting challenge for me was, or I guess not interesting, but like I said, I was a very technical journalist, but then I get into this role at Microsoft, and it's not that I'm not smart, it's not that I can't get up to date on things, but I really did have to buckle down and learn about a lot of new things and really kind of skill up and get better at things, because so many of the people I work with are so smart. And even though I know I won't ever be as smart as some of them or as talented as some of them in their areas of expertise, I know what I'm good at, and I know, okay, I do have the capability to get better with this, to learn how this works, and to, more importantly, like learn how to explain what this is to a technical audience, but maybe an audience that doesn't have all the information and is just maybe coming into a topic. So
That's very cool. So actually, I could very relate to parts of your story. It's very interesting. I love it that it's not traditional, but I also created my first website in 99.
Nice.
GeoCities, right?
Mine too. That's where I was. I was on GeoCities, yes.
Yeah, and so I studied in this gifted kids school, and then I studied computer science in high school and everything. But I never thought that I'm gonna be a developer, which is what I do currently.
Mm-hmm.
Because I imagined it as a really gray work, and I thought you're gonna sit alone in a room. Everything's gonna be great. The room, the computer,
Right.
your life.
Right. I kind of thought that too. It was like, oh, I'll be sitting in a cubicle, and I might be alone or with people who are not very nice to me, and like you said, gray. Not that interesting.
Yeah, and then I wanted to study law. I wanted to go
That's so
to a law
funny.
school, and eventually I had to pay for the tuition. So I had to work, and I had some experience. So I worked as an automation engineer, and then I fell in love with it because suddenly I met such nice people, and I had an amazing mentor, and we spoke all day. We just like discussed the architecture and the code and like patterns and how to create things correctly, and we cooperated with each other, and it was so nice. So I just fell in love with it, but only after I was already there. So I was very privileged to be able to see how it is from the inside.
Yeah, but I think that's important for people to hear, that you thought that it was going to be gray. You thought the job would be one thing, and look, maybe some jobs are like that, but you were able to see it doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah.
And then you can do different things. And then you fell in love with automation, and you fell in love with the work and the people. I think that's awesome. That's awesome. It's interesting too. I'm not trying to say there are a lot of similarities between law and engineering, because there aren't, but there are certain things I think with not everyone, but a lot of us who are, kind of the developer mindset, where, I don't know about you, I instinctively always look for patterns. I always try to kind of see and solve puzzles and things like that. And so those were things that always appealed to me about coding, about programming,
Yeah.
But what I always loved about building websites, why did you build your first website? What was it for you?
It was about meteors.
Nice.
And it was just a project for this school. We had to build something, but I wanted just to learn about them and like have a lot of photos of them and so on.
Right. So for you, you're just wanting to create something. With me, it was similar. It was in '96, and it was also a school project. And this was when the web was still very new, and so it was kind of flashy to build a website, because that was not something that most seventh graders did. In fact, it was just me and my best friend Lee, the two of us who did that. But it was a similar thing. I wanted to have photos and I wanted to show things off. And for me, I don't know if this was the same case for you with the web, but for me, I always loved kind of creating things and having like creative looking things. And I loved the idea of like, I can make my website my own space and I can have it designed the way I want and I can have it do what I want it to do. And that was when I kind of realized that that was the power of code. That's never left me. That I still love to this day is the idea that I can build something and make it my own.
Really cool.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the things that I do nowadays is I founded 4 years ago an organization called Extend, and one of its activities is a community of experienced female engineers that is called Baot and is operating in Israel, and we have over 2,000 members.
Amazing.
Very awesome community that I love a lot, and I get to speak with a lot of female engineers, and many times they feel uncomfortable to speak in conferences or even at work about technology because they feel they don't have enough knowledge, or they're gonna be asked a lot of deep questions that they don't know about, and it's very intimidating for them. What do you think about that?
First of all, don't be intimidated. Almost no one who is speaking there are very few people who are so incredibly talented and so smart will have all the answers to all the questions. So maybe the person who invented the language, right? So if you were at a Python conference and Guido is there, then yes, he will probably know many of the answers. But most people don't. So I think I understand that fear. A lot of times we're afraid of looking dumb. We're afraid of not being good enough. The thing I would say is that I don't want to overly generalize, but most men don't have that fear. Most men are okay with either, kind of riffing and just talking generally, or if they don't know, saying, I don't know. And you and I, we were talking before we did this podcast, and you made an observation that is really true, which is just by the act of doing it and speaking once, you get credibility, whether that's earned or unearned, by having spoken. People will then look at you differently and see you as an expert and see you as someone who knows what they're talking about just because you've spoken in public. And so it can be scary, but I think it's a really important thing for people to do. For me, I was lucky. I've never minded being like on camera or on stage. I did acting when I was a kid, and I like speaking in public. So that wasn't difficult for me. But when I talk with other women who sometimes are afraid of that, a lot of times I think it's just what you say. It's people thinking, oh, I have to know everything about everything to do this. And that's not true. In fact, if you go to conferences and you look at what the topics of the talks are, even at a conference like Microsoft Ignite, many of the talks are much more general than what you might think, and are things that many people in the audience probably know at least some of the things that the presenter is saying is not going to be completely net new. Maybe some of the things will, but it's one of those things where if you've been following a certain space for a long time, you're like, oh yeah, I'm aware of this. To me, that should be kind of reassuring, because that means that what you present on doesn't have to encompass everything. It doesn't have to be the most deep and most technical and most advanced talk. It can be just something that some people might not be familiar with. And I would also point out, we oftentimes get in our own heads and we think, oh, if I know this, then everyone else knows how to do this too. That's not true. That's not true. And one of the interesting things I found about moving careers, switching from journalism to engineering, is that I took for granted how important, or I guess how valuable communication skills are. I thought that everyone knew how to get a point across and make an argument for something and explain something, in a relatively, easy to understand way. I didn't understand that that's something that many, many people struggle with, and that it could be, in the corporate world especially, very valuable when I have to talk to lots of different groups of people, and they might not all understand one another, but I can kind of act as the translator. I didn't realize how valuable that would be. I thought that everyone could do that, because in my mind, I thought, oh, well, if I know how to do this and if I'm good at this, then everyone can do it. And that's not the case. So I think a lot of times, especially with technical conferences, if there's something that you're passionate about or something you're interested in, the chances are that many people in the audience, it will be new to them. And they won't know everything that you're saying. But in addition to that, if you do get questions where someone's asking you something and you don't know, it's okay to say, I don't know. If you think about yourself, I don't think any less of someone who's honest with me and says, I have to look into that, or I'm not sure, because I know I don't know everything. And so I think just it's important, though, I think to do it and to speak, both because, like we were saying before, there's this credibility that comes with having spoken at a conference. And maybe it's not fair, but it's the truth of the world that we live in. And so that can be really helpful for furthering your career by saying, I've spoken at these places, or, I've written this paper that has been published up here, or I've given this demo, or I have this experience with this group. That can be really helpful in getting further in your career. And also, I think, for me, the more women and people in underrepresented groups that we have who are willing to take the chance and speak and be on stage, or write books or papers or blog posts, the more we can bring other people who are not the typical tech person into the fold, because we tend to mirror what we see. And so it excites me when I see more women on stage at tech conferences, because that's only going to encourage more women to join, and hopefully maybe make it easier so that people don't think in their minds, oh, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, and just say, oh, I see all these other people who look like me who are doing this, I should participate as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it also normalizes it.
Yes.
And I think Microsoft did a really good job in this conference. I was very happy to see a lot of women and people of color and like different people on the stage.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's always more work we can do, but it's getting better all the time. And when I see women and people of color and other underrepresented groups on stage, it makes me so happy, because to me, so many of the people, developers that I know, come from so many different backgrounds. And it's not homogenous. It is very varied. But for whatever reason, the stigma is still that you're probably a white male or white appearing male who started coding when he was young and studied computer science in college and went straight into a software job. But that's just not the reality. Many of us, men and women, come from different places, and it's good to see that represented, because I think it helps normalize that everyone, if they want to do this, can do this.
Yeah. So let's say you need to create a new content and teach something or create a new talk. How do you prepare? How do you learn? Do you do a tutorial or?
Yeah.
Right.
So sometimes I'll do tutorials. I read a lot. That's probably, this isn't going to be the case for everyone, but I'm sometimes I'll watch videos, but a lot of times I really like to read first and see what's happening. And then if something's confusing to me, maybe I'll watch a video of someone walking through a process to see what's supposed to happen. But I read as much as I can, and then I go through tutorials. I want to actually figure it out myself. So for instance, we're doing a set of content for both Microsoft Ignite, and then we have a regional event called Microsoft Ignite the Tour, and we will actually be in Tel Aviv as one of the cities that we'll be visiting. I've been in charge of our Azure Fundamentals learning path, and so we have 10 different sessions in that learning path. And I didn't create the content for all 10 of them. I did for 3 of them, but I did the outlines for all of the content to make sure what we were doing. And so in that case, it was going through, okay, these are the areas we're doing, and then trying to just get a high-level idea of what are the main topics that I think are important for a new person to Azure to know. What things, in this case, it was a little bit easier because we have a certification that we offer. And so I didn't want to just have it be aligned with the certification, but I did want it to be similar enough that if people wanted to get certified, the content and the talks would be helpful to that process. So it was just looking through documents, reading blog posts, going through tutorials. And when it comes to building the content itself, a lot of it is me trying and failing and playing around with things until I get it to work, and then documenting that process, and then finding a way to, okay, how can I explain these things in 45 minutes. And so, but a lot of it is a lot of reading, a lot of tutorials, a lot of trying and failing, playing with things. I mean, to me, that's the most fun part of coding is building things, and sometimes it breaks and blows up, and sometimes it works really well. And there's nothing better than when your code compiles and does what you want it to do. But there's also sometimes it's okay when you're working that out and it doesn't work, because once you get that, you find the error and you fix it, you've got that aha moment, you feel so good. So for me, a lot of it is reading and going through tutorials, going through videos, and then trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way I can show this off in a way that is easy for someone to understand and doesn't go too into the weeds. I don't give super like 400, 500 level technical talks. For those, I think that it would be, you have to assume a base knowledge and you would be able to go more in depth. But for, 100, 200 level things, it's usually just about, okay, how can I be accurate in what I'm presenting, but also make it easy for somebody who might not have a lot of experience in this particular thing, know what's going on and feel like they can give it a shot.
Mm-hmm. Do you get to interview engineers both as a preparation for like part of the learning process and maybe also as part of your advocacy job, as you said before?
Yeah, definitely. So I interview engineers sometimes on stage at events, but a lot of times, this is the great thing about working, and you don't even have to work at a big company to do this. I think that just being part of a community is just reaching out to people and saying, hey, can you tell me more about this? And so sometimes the interview might just be like a Slack conversation, or, sometimes it might be in person or otherwise, but just wanting to get information. People are so always happy to help. That's the thing too, is that I've been really lucky in that it hasn't been since I was much, much younger that I've run into people who were unwilling to help if you are willing to learn,
Yeah. Have you encountered people who it's hard to ask questions because they talk about topics in a way that is very hard to understand, and then you don't know exactly how to progress with the talk?
Yeah, definitely. And that can be difficult. That can be a challenge. And so sometimes it's a matter of finding the right person to talk to, because there are some people who are just better at communicating than others. And there might be people who are really smart and are really good at what they do, but aren't able to explain it well. This is one of the reasons why I think the documentation is so important, and why I also think that commenting and documenting your code is so important, because it really makes it that much easier for someone else to come in and know what's happening. A lot of us, don't like documenting. I actually love it. I love to document code, and I love to kind of set that process, because I hate inefficiency. And if I have to I figured automation stuff, if I have to redo something that I've done before, and I hate nothing more than that. And so for me, it usually only takes one time of me having to redo the exact same thing for me to say, I'm documenting this someplace, whether it's my own wiki, whether it's something else, whether it's a code comment. I'm going to document how to do this. And I think that's really important when working with teams, whether it's your own project or at a company, to have what you're doing documented so that someone else can understand. And that can help, I think, if you're talking to the person and if they're just not able to explain it as well.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's difficult. Not everybody can explain things well, and so sometimes you're kind of at an impasse, and you either have to try to find someone else, or that can be hard. I don't really have an answer for that, but it happens sometimes. I'm lucky in that I'm usually pretty good at talking to people, but that doesn't mean that they might not be able to, that they're always able to, explain things the way I want. But I'm really lucky. I work with a lot of really smart people who are also really good explainers, so I can usually call on one of them. But I think this is what's great about kind of the age of social media and digital connectedness, is that even if I don't have someone that I know in person, there's someone on Twitter, or there's someone on Reddit, or there's, someone, on some of the online communities that you can pose a question to, and people are willing to help and to answer questions.
Yeah. That's really interesting. The reason I ask is because I think it's many times part of our job. Like, we need to write something in somebody else's code, and we need to understand it, and then we need to approach someone, and not always it's easy to get the answers.
Yeah, you're right. It's not. I think it can be a real challenge. And so sometimes, we work with what we have. You work with what you have. You work with, you do it to the best that you can. If you can't get the answers, if it's a true blocker, try to see if there's someone else who can do it. And if it's not, just go with what you have and try to figure it out. And more often than not, if it's wrong, the person will tell you. And at that point, you can say, okay, well, then I need to know from you why. And you can kind of sometimes, force them to be a little more open about what exactly is happening.
Yeah. All right. So I imagine that you also need to learn about the pain points of developers to be able to have empathy for their problems and really understand them deeply, to be able to then create some changes in the way things work.
Definitely.
How do you do that?
Okay, so one is by talking with them. And so when I go to events like this, I like to spend a lot of time just talking to people. And I always try to encourage people, don't just tell me what you think I want to hear. Just because I work at Microsoft doesn't mean that you have to tell me that everything that we make is great. Because I know it's not. I know that there are going to be challenges. But I want to know, what are you having troubles with? Maybe it's not even with our specific product. Maybe it's just in general with programming. Maybe, you work with JavaScript and you have a challenge with this. And maybe you're not even using Azure, but this is a struggle that you have. I want to know what those pain points are and what your current approach is, because that can be helpful when I'm then maybe talking to some of our JavaScript teams and saying, hey, there's this opportunity maybe for us to work on something. Have you considered this? And maybe they already have. Maybe it's already in the works, or maybe I can offer some insights. So talking with developers is the first thing. And many of my friends are developers. And even when I was a journalist, this was something I always did, which I talked to them and I wanted to tell their stories. And I wanted to find out. Many times I would advocate on their behalf in news publications where a company would change an API or restrict access to something, or would launch or remove a new feature, and it would make people's lives really difficult. And I would write about why that was and why that was happening and what those struggles were. And, maybe that helped convince the companies to make different decisions. Maybe it didn't, but at least it was giving a voice to the people who are having issues. The second thing, though, in addition to talking with people, is I think it's really important to use the tools yourself and to go through that process yourself. And that has been really helpful for me when I have conversations with some of our product teams, because they'll let us know what they're working on, and sometimes we'll be able to partner with them. But many times, they have a specific use case and a specific way something works in mind. And if I'm trying to use something and I'm running into issues, I can file bugs and I can file feedback, and I can make comments, in documentation about either add additional information or say, hey, this isn't really clear. But for me, it's really important to actually use not just our tools, but other, organizations' tools as well, to figure out, okay, what is the real experience here? And if I'm trying to set up a small project, if I'm running into issues, again, I kind of go back to the documentation thing where I document every single problem that I'm having. And then I figure out, okay, how can I best present this in a way that I don't want to look like I'm attacking anyone, because I know how hard they work, but that is kind of saying, okay, these are some of the struggles. And sometimes I can have a conversation and learn, oh, there's another way of doing this. And that can be really useful, because then if I'm having a conversation with a developer or a user, I can say, and they are having the same problem, it's like, oh, well, did you know that you could do it this way? And they might not know. Or there's this alternative. But for me to get that empathy, the two things are talking and then also doing. And I think the doing part is really important. And you don't have to do everything, but just even going through the process of setting something up, or of trying to deploy something, if that's the case, or trying out a new service, just to get that experience to see, oh, this was really simple and this was great, or oh, I ran into some issues here and this part wasn't clear. And so maybe that's an opportunity to create content that makes that clear. Or maybe that's an opportunity to give some feedback that says, is there something we can do to make this better? But the big things are talking and doing.
All right, cool. Really good tips. Do you feel sometimes that you need to create space for yourself? And if so, how do you do that?
What do you mean? Like, do I need to, like...
that you need to start doing something that nobody did before you, so you need to convince people to allow you to do that, or to cooperate with you on that.
All the time. All the time.
All right.
Yeah, all the time. And that's not unique to just engineering. That was even the case when I was a journalist. I don't think it's an uncommon thing. I think especially, I don't want to say just for women, because I know men go through this too, but I think that it can sometimes be difficult to convince people that your idea is good, even if all your other ideas have been good. And so sometimes, yeah, I do think I don't think that you have to have a truly unique approach. I think that can be great if you do something that just you're really good at and kind of focus in on that. That's a great differentiator. But I think if you have just a new way of looking at things, yeah, I very frequently have to then convince others to take a shot. And a lot of that comes down to writing a good doc and writing and making a good presentation and making the case for that, which I guess in some ways is a little bit like being a lawyer. But it really comes down to saying, okay, figuring out why do I think this has an opportunity? What do I think the outcome could be? And then making that case to the people involved. And sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. What's good is when you get the opportunity to try, if you're successful, then that kind of gives you a point in your column. And not always, but usually, if you're going to the same people again in the future, they'll remember that. It might take having to remind them, hey, remember, this thing. You didn't think that we should move, you didn't think that we should put our content on YouTube, but look at how great that's going now. We should consider doing this. So yeah, it's important to do that, I think, but it can also be a challenge. I think it's one of those things I tend to be a pretty direct person, and I'm not afraid of, I guess, I don't set out to offend anyone, certainly, but I'm not afraid to be direct and say, I think this is a good idea, and you should look at this. Sometimes I think that directness has helped me. I know not everyone can do that, but for me, that's been something I think that's been really important, is just to ask for what I want and be confident that what I'm proposing is a good idea, because I know that it is. Because if you don't come across as confident, sometimes people won't take it as seriously. So fake it until you make it. Even if you're not confident about something, if you think it's important, project that sense of confidence and ask for what you want. To me, I think that's actually, for women in general, especially in engineering, we don't do a good enough job of asking for what we want, whether that's promotions or raises or getting more responsibility or getting to work on the things we want. It's okay to ask for what you want. Now, that doesn't mean you demand and you say, if I don't get this, I'm going to leave. But saying, this is what I want to do, and making that clear, I think is really important, and is something that women in general, we don't do it well enough. But it's really important to do, especially if we want to continue to rise and have more successes in our careers. Yeah, grow, exactly.
All right, perfect. When we prepared for this recording, we also discussed the rules of the game.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we try to pay forward in this podcast and in our communities is to teach people how the industry works. Because people that don't speak a lot with different friends about it sometimes just don't understand that sometimes you do need, like you said, to speak at a conference, to go back to your company and be perceived as knowledgeable and so on. So if you could tell a little bit about what you learned when you started to work in tech, and if it was different from between the different industries.
Yeah, there were definitely some differences. There were some similarities, but there were some differences. One of the things I didn't know, I knew in journalism, for instance, how to negotiate for a salary. I knew what my worth was, relatively speaking, and I knew what some of the industry standards were, and I knew how much I could ask for, and I knew the rules, which is, and this is across industries, but you always ask for more than what you want, not for the amount you want, you always ask for more, and if they give you that, then that's bonus, but if they give you less, then hopefully what they're giving you less is going to be what you actually wanted, but that's kind of the negotiation. I knew the rules in journalism. I didn't know the rules in tech. And so when I joined Microsoft, I didn't really do a good job negotiating. And that's okay. I learned, and I've gotten better since then. But I actually think one of the ways to kind of, learn the rules is for more women to talk to one another about their experiences. And so whether that's how much you make, or what your level is, and what kind of your level of seniority is, or other things that can sometimes be uncomfortable, but I think are really important, because if you kind of get the sense of, okay, this is the baseline, then when you go in to try to get a promotion or to try to get a raise, what you can ask for and what is acceptable. Because oftentimes, that's the really challenging thing, is you don't know. There are websites that can be useful that will show kind of pay scales, and it can obviously differ region to region and country to country. But having conversations with people in your field, both men and women, to know what people's levels are and what their experience is really important to know. It's for me, I think, important. And once you figure that out, going back to what I was saying before, it's okay to ask for what you want. And it's okay to say, I'm worth this. And I think that's often one of the rules. One of the rules is that if you don't ask for something, there are some people and some managers who will just go ahead and give it to you and say, the work that you've done is so extraordinary that we're going to reward you. That's usually not what happens. And I think that that's a misconception a lot of people have. They think, if I just do the work, I'm going to be recognized and I'm going to be promoted accordingly. That's that's not always the case. You have to actually ask for it, and you have to actually say, I want this. And if the answer is, even if you don't want to say, this is what I want, give it to me, you can say, okay, this is what I want to do. What can you, talking with a manager or a mentor, what do I need to do to get to this point? And coming up with a plan, but making it very clear that that's your goal. So I think that's an important thing in tech, is knowing, working with people to get a goal, to get to where you want to be, but making it clear, this is what I want and this is what my goal is. Because if I'm just doing the work and having my head down, that's great, but I can't count on other people to reward me and recognize that. It's, you've got to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm doing this. I think another thing too is, it's important to be proud of your accomplishments. If you're doing really well at something is really successful, it's important to be able to talk about that. And whether that was, I spoke at a conference with this many people and I got this kind of feedback, or I made this contribution to this project and solved this blocker and now we were able to get shipped, or, I was helped, refine this line of code and solve this problem for us. Take your successes, be proud of those things. And whether it's on your resume or, in your biographies, if you're going to speaking someplace, feel free to talk about that. Feel free to talk about what you've helped do and be proud of that. Because that's, again, kind of one of the, I think, unspoken rules, is that this can be different region to region, but it's important to not be afraid to own your successes and to be proud of the work that you've done.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think sometimes people think that things work in a certain way and then they don't speak about it with other people, and actually things work in a completely different way, like what you said with the raises. And then it's really important to speak with as many people as possible to learn how things work in general, and in these types of companies, like the company that one can work for, and in the specific company that somebody works for.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Things can be different company to company, place to place, but it's just important to talk with the people that you work with to figure out what those rules are. Even when you just first join a place, or even if you've been a place for a long time, just having those conversations. And sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but it's really helpful. I think that the good thing is, in the last few years, there's been more openness around that. And I think that with women especially, we need to be more open with one another about how things work to help one another. I said this to you before we recorded. When I look back at my career, when I was in journalism, the best managers that I had, in terms of those who really gave me raises without being asked and really promoted me and really treated me probably the best in those ways, were women. And that's, when I look back at that, I'm so grateful to those women who did those things. And as I'm now in a position of being, more of a leader and having those opportunities, it's so important for me to pay that forward. And so I am always open to talking to, more junior engineers, or even, people who are journalists, to say, hey, this is what you're worth. This is what you can ask for. And in some cases, it might even be as simple as, and I never do this to make anyone feel bad, but I'll ask people, I'll say, okay, how much are you making right now? And they'll tell me, and I can very quickly kind of tell them, okay, you need to ask for more, or, okay, that's good, and you're in a really good position, or you're doing really well. And when you tell someone you need to ask for more, you don't want them to be upset, but it's important for them to know, hey, you're getting screwed here. It is completely acceptable for you to ask for more here, because this is what I was making at that time in my career, or this is what I know other people are making. You have this opportunity. You can feel confident that you can go into that conversation with your manager, when asking for promotion or asking for a raise, to say, hey, I know the data. Again, we're engineers. We look at patterns. We look at data. It's like, I know what the data says, and so it's perfectly acceptable for me to ask for this.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things, because it's so easy and it's so impactful to just, when people approach me and they're looking for a job, I will usually ask them, how much do you plan to ask for? And they would say something, and I will say, I think you should ask for 10K more. Mm-hmm. And shekels, which is 3K more, right. Dollars more or less.
Sure.
So many times they will say, oh, I don't think so. It's not what I see in the in the news, and it's not what my friends are making. And I'm going to be, okay, here are 3 people, contact them, I can connect you with them, and they'll convince you that they have less experience than you, and they are earning more right now, and they didn't have to negotiate very, strongly about it.
No, and I think that's a great point too. And many people don't ask for more, and leave it on the table. I've made that mistake many times in my career, and even though I'm always advocating for others to do the opposite, it's funny. It's like I don't always take my own advice. I have recently, and I've been successful, but it's something I think that's really important to go ahead and just ask for it. I mean, the worst that they can say is no, and then you're not in any worse position. If for some reason that ask would be something that would not even be a no, but go, oh, we don't want to extend an offer anymore, something much bigger is going on, and so that would be a huge red flag. So yeah, I think that's great advice to tell people to ask for more, and then to connect them with people who have less experience and are making more money, so people understand, because the reality is this: some managers and some people will definitely go out of their way to help get you the best offer you can, but it is not in a company's best interest to pay you the most, right? So if you accept a lower offer, there's nothing wrong with the company accepting that. They're going to be very happy to pay you less. But one of the rules is usually you have to ask for more. And sometimes they'll give you that to you, or sometimes that'll be an open for a negotiation where they will offer you a counter, and you can get, maybe a little bit more than that, but or right at what you were originally targeting. This is also one of the pieces, one of the rules that typically happens when you work on projects and you're trying to get budget for projects. Never ask for the amount you need. Always ask for more than you need, because, and then always spend it. You never want to have any money left over at the end of the project, because the next project they won't give you as big of a budget. It's crazy, but that's how it works. And so, yeah, always ask for a little bit of wiggle room, just to ensure you actually get the amount you need. Because if you ask for like the exact amount that your project is budgeted for, they might come back and say, okay, well, here's 20% less. And that's not going to be enough. That's going to be putting you in a position of a problem. So if you ask for 20% more, they might come back and give you the exact amount you need. So yeah. Always asking for more. I'm a big believer in that.
That's a really good advice. All right, we have to finish soon. So
yes.
I wanted to ask you if you have one last thing that you would like to share with our audience, or maybe a tip or recommendation or some experience that you want to share.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, and I especially want to say this to anybody who is maybe thinking about switching careers or switching specialties. So maybe you're going from a PM to being an engineer, or an engineer to being a PM, or you're going, from working at one type of, code base to another, or maybe you're someone like me who didn't have a traditional tech background and are now trying to get a job in tech. The biggest thing that I would say, and this is something that took me a long time to learn, but has been so important once I kind of realized this, is that you're never starting from zero. The things that you have in your life, even things that you might not think would be applicable to your new role, your past, many of those skills that you have from what you've done before will be useful in the future. And I think so many times, especially when we look at job requirements, which are almost always, as women, we always think, oh, I have to hit all of them. No, you don't. You need to get the basic gist. And it's usually, in most cases, you're going to learn on the job. And in fact, many times, the job description is not always what the job is, right? Like, how many times have we talked to people, or even ourselves, you take a job, you think it'll be one thing, and then you wind up doing something very different, right? So you learn on the job. What's written on the page is just, a wish list. It's not like you have to have every requirement. But also, if you're looking at trying to do something new, don't discount your past experiences. Even if you think that those skills might not be useful, you'll be surprised. But you're not starting from zero. You still have a base level of knowledge and past experiences that will help you. And for me, when I figured that out, it made me feel much more comfortable about trying new things and about going deeper into areas I wasn't as comfortable with, because I realized, I do have a whole history of things that I've done and experienced. And maybe some of those things, maybe there'll be some brand new things I need to learn. But there are probably things in my past that will be really beneficial here that I didn't even know. So you're never starting from zero is what I would say. What you've done in your past will be useful in your future.
Amazing. All right, Christina Warren, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing all your knowledge. It's been a really big pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm honored to be here, and thanks for the group that you put together. That's amazing, and congratulations on all the success with that. I think that's so fantastic, and I hope to see you expand that more as time goes on.
Thank you.